Good day to you. Today we are answering the big question. Does loss of rental need to be covered? Wow, big one. And it's quite an important area. Well, debatable. Believe it or not, the prescribed rules prior to the new Sectional Title Schemes Management Act being introduced, the old Sectional Title Act rules pre-2016 actually stipulated that you needed to actually cover loss of rent cover. And it wasn't very clear. I always suggested that they were clearer when they made the new rules, but actually, guess what? They left it out when they brought in the new rules. Okay, the new rules do not include anything about loss of rent or alternative accommodation. So arguably, in terms of sectional title legislation, there is nothing that requires you to cover against loss of rent or alternative accommodation. I do think that's a weakness. I think it was a mistake, quite honestly, an error or an omission more than anything else. And the old act used to, I think it was Rule 29A, and it said loss of occupational rent in respect of any of the above risks. Okay, I'll put it up on the screen so you can see what it used to say. Okay, but if you look at Rule 23, if you look at the parts of the Act, you look at the functions of the body corporate, doesn't actually mention or even come near to mentioning loss of rent or alternative accommodation. So arguably, and this could open a debate since it's not there, if you want the cover, maybe you can argue that you need a special resolution even. So yeah, if there is a policy that pops up that doesn't have it, there could end up being an argument of whether it's required or not. It makes sense to have it. There are products out there that do have it. Most of the products that we work with certainly have it. But arguably, if it's not there, it wasn't a requirement. And if there wasn't an owner's call for it in a meeting, maybe it wasn't really required. However, when we come to the Phase Act and good broking or good advice, sound, fit and proper advice, we as brokers know that it would be a general need and, it would be generally accepted by a reasonable person that one would try and have that cover in place. Okay, so without going into any depth, we are going to go into more depth on the subject in a client video. So if you're a Addison user, in other words, if they use our system as a managing agent, then you can have access to a little bit more about the subject. But on as a general public viewpoint for everybody to understand, I think just understand that it's not in the Act, but it should be considered. Okay, we think at least loss of rent. Okay, and we're looking at insuring the owner here. So we say at least it should cover the owner against their loss of rent. Okay, and we don't expect it to be a loss of business rent if it's a residential complex. Let's be reasonable about things. A normal residential loss of rental and alternative accommodation. So if an owner's place burns down, they are resident in that unit or section, then alternative accommodation would be helpful, and they should actually, I think it would be fair for them to expect them to be covered in that regard. Okay, whether or not the policy should include a tenant's alternative accommodation, we say technically not. The policy is there to protect the owners in the scheme, not to protect their tenants. Okay. However, I can tell you now from practical experience, it is unpleasant landing up just after a fire or during a fire event, because we do try to respond as quickly as we can ourselves to assist everybody. And it is not really a nice thing to have to actually say to somebody, sorry, no cover for you, but for you there is cover. It could look like preference, and it can lead to all sorts of ugliness. So we do like it if the insurer does provide some sort of emergency arrangement, at least for the first night or two, for tenants as well. It's not there in most policies, but we note that some of the insurers do provide that. Okay, so not a requirement in terms of the Act, but a reasonable policy we think would be to cover at least the owners for loss of rent or alternative accommodation up to a certain amount. Okay, so there we have it. Thank you. And don't forget the 3 things. Hey? Don't forget to like us. Don't forget to subscribe to us. And by all means, please share this video across the board. And don't forget, add your clients. There's more in store for you. Thank you. Bye-bye.